Rome was at the height of its power, marching across Europe as if nothing could stop it. Its legions were feared, its generals revered, and its emperors were absolutely certain that the future already belonged to them. But every wall has a crack, and for Rome, that crack had a name: Arminius. Born in the forests of Germania, raised among trees that seemed to hide ancient secrets, Arminius was taken by Rome, trained by Rome, honored by Rome. He learned Latin, fought alongside the legions, earned the trust of commanders. Yet while the empire believed it was shaping the perfect ally, it was actually feeding the enemy who would change its destiny forever. When he returned to his homeland, Arminius found a divided people and an empire advancing without limits. And it was there, faced with the growing submission of the Germanic tribes, that he decided to turn history upside down. Using everything Rome had taught him, he transformed the empire's own arrogance into a weapon, united peoples who had never fought together, and prepared a revolt that Rome could never erase from its memory. What happened next marked the heart of the greatest empire of antiquity forever, to the point of making Emperor Augustus cry out in despair, "Varus, give me back my legions." Today, you will discover the rise, the strategy, and the impact of Arminius, the barbarian who changed Rome's destiny and ignited the revolt they never forgot. Before we move on to the next part of the story, let me ask you a quick favor, one that makes all the difference for the growth of this channel. Take a moment to check if you're already subscribed. That way, you won't miss the upcoming videos because there's still a lot of powerful content coming about Rome, its forgotten wars, its most dangerous enemies, and the events that truly changed the destiny of the greatest empire of antiquity. There will be battles, betrayals, legendary generals, and moments that history almost hid. So go ahead and subscribe, activate the notification bell, and come along with me on this journey. The cold wind swept through the forest as if carrying an ancient warning, something that echoed from the mountains of Germania all the way to the marble walls of Rome. At that time, when the empire stood at the height of its power, with roads cutting across continents and legions that made kings kneel without thinking twice, almost no one dared to raise their voice against that absolute authority. But history never bends entirely to logic, and sometimes a single man, coming from the least expected place, becomes the crack that threatens an entire wall. And this is exactly where he appears, the barbarian who changed Rome's destiny, even without ever setting foot inside the Senate, even without wearing a toga, even without carrying anything on his body besides courage, conviction, and a silent hatred for the empire that tried to shape him. Because the truth, the one Rome tried to bury for centuries, is simple. This man didn't just defeat armies. He defeated the arrogance of an empire that believed it was invincible. This story begins long before the ambush that would wipe out 3 entire legions. It begins in a land where trees rose like dark towers and rivers twisted like living borders. There, among tribes that fought more among themselves than against any outside enemy, was born the young man who would one day make Rome bleed. He grew up hearing stories of invasions, broken treaties, and Roman promises that always came with an iron hook hidden behind them. But at the same time, he watched his own tribe surrender to the brightness of Roman civilization, to the Latin language, the coins, the illusion of comfort that came with an alliance, with a giant that had never befriended anyone without taking something in return. When he was still just a boy, he was handed over to the Romans as a political hostage, a common practice of the time. It was how Rome broke leaders before they became problems, educating their sons, severing their roots, reshaping their heirs. And for a while it worked. The boy learned Latin, learned military strategy, learned to march in legionary rhythm, learned about discipline, honor, and power. Rome shaped him as a soldier, an auxiliary, a commander. The empire embraced him, but Rome's embrace always had 2 faces, one of gold, the other of iron. Little by little, he grew and became part of the Roman military machine. He served in campaigns, received praise, earned citizenship, and rode beside important commanders. Everything suggested he would follow the same path as so many young men from border tribes, serve Rome, return to his homeland as a loyal ally, and help pacify his own people in the name of the empire. But something inside him never fully bowed. Because every time he obeyed an order, he also heard the ancient voice of the forests where he was born. Every time he marched alongside the legions, he remembered the smell of the wet soil of his tribe. And while Rome had given him tools, it never erased what he truly was. When he finally returned to Germania as a Roman officer, he found everything worse than he remembered. The Romans had advanced further, dominated more, humiliated more. Tribes that were once independent now begged for Roman help to resolve their internal disputes. Local chiefs knelt before Roman governors as if they were kings. And every road built, every fort raised, every patrol sent was one more brick in the tomb of Germanic freedom. He realized that Rome had never intended to coexist. It intended to absorb, devour, and replace. It was there, in that silent return, that something inside him finally broke. He understood he would never be a true Roman. No matter how much Latin he spoke, no matter how many military honors he earned, he would always be the useful barbarian, the convenient ally, the disposable piece. And he decided he would never live as anyone's piece. From that moment on, his mind turned into a sharpened blade, and his loyalty began to walk on two legs, one visible for Rome, the other hidden for his people. He began to observe Roman mistakes, flaws in their marches, the arrogance of their governors. He started speaking discreetly with tribal leaders, persuading some, manipulating others, forging agreements, creating alliances that would never have existed without him. His name began to spread around the fire pits, carried by rumors that moved like wind. He's back. He knows Rome better than the Romans themselves. He knows how they think. He knows how they fight. Slowly, tribes that barely spoke to one another began to hear his call. He told them Rome was strong, but not invincible. He said he knew their weakness. He said that if they joined forces, they could make the impossible happen. Rome, on the other hand, trusted him blindly. And no Roman trusted him more than the governor, who commanded 3 legions in that region. A man convinced that Germania was practically conquered, that the local people were pacified, that all he had to do was sign documents, judge disputes, and manage taxes. This governor never imagined he was walking on thin ice, and that the person he trusted most was the only one who knew exactly where that ice would break. When the tribes began provoking disturbances, isolated attacks, seemingly random thefts, he rushed to inform the governor that immediate action was needed. The governor followed his advice the way a father follows the guidance of his favorite son. And Rome divided its forces, opened its formations, and exposed itself in terrain it should never have stepped into in such vulnerable conditions. The march began. Constant rain, flooded roads, heavy baggage, families traveling along. A slow, fragile convoy, each step sinking deeper into enemy territory. And all around them, shadows moved. The governor, suspecting nothing, continued believing that his Germanic ally was preparing support. He had no idea that this support was on the other side of the forest, watching, calculating, preparing the blow that would go down in history. The first attack came fast, silent, and brutal. Spearmen appeared between the trees as if the forest itself were spitting out warriors. The terrain drained the movement of the legions, preventing formation, preventing advance, preventing retreat. It was a tactical nightmare. The rain grew heavier, the swamp swallowed boots, shields grew weighty, morale collapsed. And every time a Roman group tried to reorganize, it was thrown back into chaos by attacks coming from impossible directions. Rome had never faced anything like this. Not there. Not in that way. The governor tried to flee, tried to break through, tried to do everything a trained commander would do. But nothing worked. The enemy knew his movements before the legionaries even raised their shields. It was as if he were fighting a reversed version of the Roman army, but one that knew their weaknesses better than they did. Days later, silence ruled the forest. No legion escaped. No Roman eagle was saved. 3 entire legions vanished. The governor lost his life. And Rome, for the first time in decades, felt fear. Inside the imperial palace, Augustus himself fell into deep mourning, repeating in despair the words that echoed through history. Varus, give me back my legions. Rome was not weeping for its dead. Rome was horrified because it had discovered that it was not invincible. But the story doesn't end here. Roman vengeance came like an avalanche. Tiberius advanced with more legions, burning villages, destroying crops, executing leaders, crushing rebellions. Yet, even with all the might of the greatest empire of the age, they never managed to capture that man, the barbarian who had changed everything. And his life was far more than battles. He lost allies, lost relatives, lost his own wife to Roman captivity. He saw his name hunted. He saw his people doubt him. He saw rival tribes try to usurp his position. From the moment he humiliated Rome, he became a target from every side. But he never backed down, never apologized, never bowed his head. Even Rome, with its endless resources, seasoned legions, and legendary generals, never managed to defeat him directly. What brought this man down was not Roman iron, but the old curse of the Germanic tribes, their own internal rivalry. Betrayed by his own kin, executed in a silent coup, he died young, but he died having done the impossible. He pushed Rome out of Germania and permanently changed the empire's plans. Decades later, ironically, the very tribes that betrayed him ended up asking Rome for help. And the empire, with the calm of someone who knew revenge had already been carried out by time, sent as king of those lands the Roman descendant of the barbarian's own brother, the same lineage of the man who once made them tremble. Rome won without lifting a sword, and only because the man who once threatened the empire was no longer there to stop them. The story of this warrior continues to resonate because it isn't just about battles. It is about identity, about betrayal, about strategy, about how a single individual, underestimated, ignored, shaped to serve, can turn the game against the greatest power of his age. And above all, it is about how arrogance can bring down even the strongest of empires. Arminius was born as a prince of the Cherusci, a Germanic tribe divided between alliances with Rome and the desire for independence. While still young, he was taken by the Romans as a political hostage, educated in Latin, trained as a soldier, and incorporated into the auxiliary army. He received Roman citizenship and the rank of eques, becoming a man who understood deeply how the legions thought and fought. When he returned to Germania, he found his homeland dominated by Roman governors and weakened tribes. Disillusioned, he began to see Rome not as a friendly civilization, but as an invader that swallowed territories and suffocated the freedom of his people. It was then that he decided to secretly organize a conspiracy, uniting several Germanic tribes, something extremely difficult, since they lived in constant rivalry. Rome, blindly trusting Arminius, sent the governor Publius Quinctilius Varus to consolidate control of the region with 3 full legions. Arminius took advantage of that trust to manipulate movements, provoke disturbances, and convince Varus to march through the worst terrain possible, the dense, humid, swampy forest of Teutoburg. There, in 9 AD, he unleashed the legendary ambush that erased 3 legions, the 17, 18, and 19, from the map. The Romans, unable to form ranks, sinking into the swamp, surrounded by united tribes who knew every inch of the forest, were annihilated. The defeat shook Rome so deeply that Augustus fell into despair and cried through the palace, "Varus, give me back my legions." In the years that followed, Tiberius and later Germanicus led massive campaigns to avenge the defeat. Germanicus faced Arminius in several major battles, recovered lost standards, and destroyed villages, but he was never able to capture him. There were dramatic moments, such as the arrest of Arminius's wife, pregnant at the time, and the verbal confrontation between Arminius and his own brother, Flavius, who served as a Roman soldier. Despite Rome's military strength, Arminius continued resisting until he was weakened by internal disputes and betrayals within Germania itself. He was assassinated by his own relatives in 19 AD. Ironically, years later, the very tribes that betrayed him begged Rome to send them a new king, and the empire sent Italicus, the grandson of Arminius's brother. His revolt forever changed Rome's destiny. Rome gave up on conquering Germania beyond the Rhine, a decision that reshaped the empire's borders and military strategy for centuries. Arminius entered history as the only barbarian leader who was never defeated directly by the Romans, and as the man whose revolt Rome never managed to forget. Now, I want to hear from you. If you were in the place of that Roman governor marching through the forest while depending on the guidance of a local ally, would you have trusted him? Or would you have noticed the trap before it was too late? Tell me in the comments. I read them all. And if this story kept you hooked until now, leave your like, subscribe to the channel, and activate the notification bell, because there are still many powerful, hidden, and surprising stories from ancient Rome that I want to share with you.